The classroom buzzed with laughter as children excitedly shared stories about their families. Some talked about vacations, others about birthday parties, while a few proudly described the gifts their parents bought them. Then their teacher smiled warmly and asked a simple question. What makes your parents special? Little Nadira lifted her tiny hand without hesitation. My daddy still holds mommy's hand every day. The classroom became quiet. The teacher chuckled softly. Every day. The little girl nodded proudly. Every single day? Even when they're walking inside our house. Daddy says if he lets go of mommy's hand, he'll forget how lucky he is. Several children giggled. One little boy whispered, "That's so cheesy." But Nadira wasn't embarrassed. She smiled even wider. My daddy always says mommy is the best thing that ever happened to him. The teacher's heart melted. She imagined an ordinary father who worked a normal job and loved his wife deeply. She had absolutely no idea that the man Nadira called Daddy was one of the most feared and influential mafia bosses in South Korea. Outside the school gates, dozens of discreet security officers watched every entrance without attracting attention. Luxury vehicles waited silently. Business executives nervously checked their watches. Powerful politicians postponed meetings until one man finished picking up his daughter from school. Yet when he finally stepped out of his black sedan, there was nothing frightening about the way he looked at the little girl running toward him. His cold expression disappeared. He knelt down, opened his arms, and smiled. My little sunshine. Nadira jumped into his embrace. Behind her, her older brother Jiho walked over with the calm confidence of someone who had grown up surrounded by extraordinary circumstances, yet never taken them for granted. Dad, Jiho greeted politely. The tall man gently ruffled his son's hair before standing. Ready to go home? Both children nodded. As they walked toward the waiting car, the children each grabbed one of their father's hands. To everyone else in the city, Kang Min-jun was a legend whose name inspired caution. To his children, he was simply Dad. And nothing in the world mattered more to him. If you enjoy heartfelt Korean-inspired romance stories filled with family, loyalty, and unforgettable characters, be sure to subscribe to @Physial_threads and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Their home overlooked the mountains outside Seoul. It wasn't merely a mansion. It was a place carefully designed to feel like a home before it felt like a fortress. Fresh flowers decorated nearly every room. Children's drawings hung proudly in the hallway instead of expensive paintings. Family photographs filled the shelves. Every evening, regardless of how demanding the day had been, everyone gathered around the dining table. There was only one rule. No phones. No meetings. No interruptions. Not even for Min-jun. Many of the people who worked for him found that rule unbelievable. One evening, his chief advisor hurried toward the dining room. "Sir, there's an urgent." Min-jun raised a hand before the man could finish. "My family is eating. But this involves tomorrow's negotiations. It can wait." The advisor hesitated. "Sir." Min-jun looked at him calmly. "My children won't remember another successful business deal." His voice softened as he glanced toward the table where his wife was helping their daughter cut vegetables into tiny pieces. "But they'll remember whether I was here." The advisor lowered his head. "Understood." He quietly left. Across the room, his wife smiled without saying a word. Her name was Naya. She had grown up far from Korea, in the beautiful hills of Rwanda, where she learned that wealth meant little without kindness. Years later, she had arrived in Seoul on a scholarship, determined to build a life through hard work, never imagining that fate would place her in the path of a man feared by nearly everyone. Unlike those who only saw Min-jun's reputation, Naya had seen the lonely man beneath it. She had also been brave enough to tell him the truth when everyone else agreed with him out of fear. That honesty had changed both of their lives. At dinner, laughter replaced silence. Jiho enthusiastically explained his science project. Nadira proudly announced she had memorized a new song. Naya listened to both children with genuine interest, asking questions that made them feel heard. Min-jun listened just as carefully. When Jiho struggled to explain part of his experiment, his father didn't interrupt. He waited. Only after his son finished did he smile. "I think that's brilliant." Jiho beamed. Those simple words meant everything. Later that evening, the family gathered in the living room for their nightly tradition. Story time. Sometimes Naya read. Sometimes Min-jun did. Tonight, the children voted. "Daddy." Min-jun pretended to sigh dramatically. "I see I've lost another election." Everyone laughed. As he began reading, his normally deep, commanding voice softened into playful character voices that made both children laugh until their stomachs hurt. Naya watched quietly from the sofa. Moments like these still amazed her. Years ago, she never imagined the man who once struggled to express his feelings would become the father their children adored. After the children fell asleep, Minjun gently covered them with blankets before walking onto the balcony. The city lights shimmered in the distance. Naya joined him with 2 cups of warm tea. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Comfortable silence had become one of their favorite conversations. Finally, Minjun broke it. I missed lunch with you. Naya smiled. I noticed. I'm sorry. She looked at him. You didn't have to apologize. I wanted to. He reached for her hand, just as Nadira had proudly described earlier that day. I promised I'd never let work make you feel second. Naya squeezed his fingers. You've kept that promise better than anyone could. He smiled, but there was still a trace of regret in his eyes. Unknown to the family, however, someone had been quietly watching from a distance, not with hatred or violence, but with a question that threatened the peaceful life they had built. A journalist had begun investigating the mysterious businessman whose private life seemed impossibly perfect, and the first clue had come from the innocent words of a little girl in a classroom. The next morning began the same way every morning had for years. Before the sun fully rose above the mountains surrounding the estate, the aroma of freshly baked bread drifted through the house. Naya stood in the kitchen wearing a simple cream-colored sweater and an apron dusted lightly with flour. Despite living in one of the most luxurious homes in Korea, she still insisted on preparing breakfast herself whenever she could. The housekeepers had offered countless times. The chefs had pleaded. Even Min Jun had suggested she let someone else do it. But she always smiled and answered the same way. One day our children won't wake up under this roof anymore. Until then, I want them to remember the smell of home. It had become one of the many reasons Min Jun fell in love with her all over again. As he walked downstairs dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his intimidating presence could have frozen an entire boardroom. Instead, he quietly walked behind his wife. Without saying a word, he wrapped one arm around her waist. His chin rested gently on her shoulder. You're stealing my breakfast again, Naya laughed. I'm quality testing. She rolled her eyes. You've been quality testing for 8 years. And I've never found a single flaw. She laughed again. From the staircase, 2 little faces peeked between the railings. Jiho folded his arms. They're doing it again. Nadira giggled. They always do. Neither child seemed embarrassed. To them, seeing their parents hug before breakfast was as ordinary as brushing their teeth. What are you two whispering about? Naya asked without turning around. Nothing, they answered together. Min Jun pretended to whisper loudly. I think they're spying on us. We are not. The entire kitchen erupted with laughter. It wasn't expensive furniture or priceless artwork that made the mansion feel alive. It was moments like these. Moments money could never buy. After breakfast, Min Jun prepared to leave for work. As always, Naya walked him to the front entrance. Just before he stepped into the waiting car, he turned around. He gently adjusted a loose strand of her hair. You'll remember lunch today? She smiled knowingly. I already packed yours. You remembered. I always remember. Instead of rushing away, Min Jun leaned forward and kissed her forehead. The security guards immediately looked away, pretending to inspect the gardens. None of them wanted to witness another one of the boss's affectionate moments. Not because they disliked it, because it reminded them how completely different he became whenever Naya was near. One of the newer guards quietly asked an older colleague, Is the chairman always like this at home? The older guard smiled. No. The young man looked confused. No. He's even softer. Across Seoul, Min Jun entered the headquarters of Kong Holdings. Within seconds, the warm husband disappeared. Executives stood immediately. Assistants straightened their posture. Silence followed him through every hallway. His reputation wasn't built on cruelty. It was built on excellence. Every decision was calculated. Every promise was kept. Every employee knew exactly where they stood. As the meeting began, presentations filled the enormous screen. Profits, investments, international partnerships. Everyone expected another long day. Then Min Jun glanced at his watch. 11:58. He calmly closed the folder in front of him. We'll continue tomorrow. The executives looked stunned. Sir, we're only halfway through. I have lunch. One director carefully cleared his throat. We can have lunch delivered. Min Jun shook his head. I already have plans. Within seconds, he was gone. The directors exchanged confused looks. One of the senior executives chuckled. He never misses Wednesday. What happens on Wednesday? Lunch with his wife. Every Wednesday. For nearly 9 years. No matter how busy life became. No matter how important the meeting. Wednesday lunch belonged to Naya. Meanwhile, Naya sat beneath a cherry blossom tree in a quiet botanical garden. She wasn't wearing expensive jewelry. No designer handbag. No bodyguard standing nearby. She simply enjoyed reading while waiting. Several minutes later, Min Jun appeared carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. You were late. By 2 minutes. She raised an eyebrow. I counted. He handed her the coffee. I deserve that. They began walking through the gardens together. No one around them recognized the couple. To strangers, they looked like any husband and wife enjoying a peaceful afternoon. I've been thinking, Naya said softly. That's usually dangerous. She nudged him gently. Our anniversary is next month. I know. What should we do? Min Jun smiled. What do you want? She thought for a moment. I don't want another luxury hotel. No. I don't want another private island. He laughed quietly. What do you want then? I want to rent bicycles. He blinked. Bicycles. And eat street food. That's all. And watch the sunset. He looked at her for several seconds. Then he smiled with the same expression he'd worn the day he proposed. Done. She laughed. You didn't even negotiate. I've learned arguing with my wife is bad business. Back at school, Jiho's teacher assigned a family essay. The topic was simple. Describe your hero. Most children wrote about famous athletes, actors, scientists. One child wrote about his grandfather. Jiho stared at his blank page. He already knew exactly who his hero was. That evening, while everyone gathered after dinner, Jiho quietly approached his father. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. Were you always brave? Min Jun looked surprised. No. Jiho frowned. But everyone says you're fearless. His father smiled gently. I still get scared. You do? Every day. Of what? Min Jun looked toward Naya, who was helping Nadira clean paint from her tiny hands. I'm afraid of losing time. Jiho didn't understand. Losing time. I can always earn more money. He looked around the living room. I can build another company. I can solve another problem. But, his voice softened. I can never get today back. Jiho quietly listened. So when you're older, Min Jun placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Don't become so busy chasing success that you forget the people waiting for you at home. Those words stayed with Jiho forever, unknown to his parents. He secretly wrote every single sentence into his school essay. A week later, the school held Family Appreciation Day. Parents filled the auditorium. Children proudly presented their essays on stage. When Jiho's name was called, he walked nervously toward the microphone. He unfolded the paper. My hero isn't famous. The audience smiled. He isn't on television. My hero is my dad. Min Jun lowered his eyes slightly. He teaches me that saying, I'm sorry, doesn't make a man weak. Naya looked at her husband. He teaches me that loving your family is more important than looking important. Several parents quietly wiped away tears. He still takes my mom on dates. He still reads bedtime stories. He still holds her hand. Jiho smiled proudly. And I want to become that kind of husband someday. The auditorium filled with applause. Naya reached for Min Jun's hand beneath their seats. The same journalist. She hadn't come searching for a scandal anymore. Instead, she found herself asking a very different question. How could the man the world feared so deeply also be the husband and father these children adored? What she decided to do with that question would soon change not only Min Jun's public image, but also force the family to confront a past they believed had long been left behind. For the first time in her career, investigative journalist Han Seo-rin closed her notebook without writing a single accusation. She had spent nearly 3 weeks quietly observing Kang Min Jun's public life. Every lead she followed had pointed to the same intimidating conclusion. He was one of the most powerful men in Korea, a businessman with enormous influence and a mysterious past that inspired equal parts respect and fear. Yet every glimpse of his private life told a completely different story. There were no secret affairs, no extravagant scandals, no reckless parties. Instead, she found a husband who never forgot his wedding anniversary, A father who rearranged billion-dollar meetings to attend school performances, and a man who still looked at his wife with the same admiration he had years ago. It didn't make sense. The public saw a legend. His family saw a gentle soul. Seo Rin couldn't decide which version was real. What she didn't know was that both were. Meanwhile, life inside the Kong household continued with its familiar rhythm. Saturday mornings belonged to the family. No business. No meetings. No visitors. Only the four of them. That weekend, the children had convinced their parents to spend the day at a quiet lakeside park outside Seoul. Instead of arriving with luxury cars and endless security, Min Jun chose something much simpler. They drove together in an ordinary family SUV. Even the security detail stayed far enough away to give them privacy. As soon as they arrived, Nadira grabbed her father's hand. "Daddy, what is it, princess?" "You promised we'd race ducks." He laughed. "I believe I promised we'd feed ducks." "No." She shook her head confidently. "You said we'd see which duck could eat first." Naya burst into laughter. "I think she's right." Min Jun pretended to sigh dramatically. "I've been outvoted again." Jiho smiled. "It happens a lot." The four of them spent the afternoon feeding ducks, renting bicycles, taking photographs, and laughing over things that would seem completely ordinary to anyone watching. But to them, ordinary was precious. Their greatest luxury had never been wealth. It was time together. As the sun began to set, they spread a blanket near the lake. Naya unpacked sandwiches she had prepared that morning. Nadira lay across her mother's lap, while Jiho skipped stones across the water with his father. "You almost beat me," Min Jun said after Jiho's fifth successful skip. "Almost." Jiho grinned. "I definitely beat you. You'll have to prove it next weekend." "It's a deal." Naya watched them from a distance. There was something deeply comforting about seeing two generations laughing together. Years earlier, she had worried that Min Jun's demanding responsibilities would keep him from becoming the father he wanted to be. Instead, he had surprised her every single day. Later that evening, after the children had fallen asleep during the drive home, Min Jun carefully carried Nadira upstairs while Jiho sleepily leaned against Naya's shoulder. After tucking them into bed, the couple quietly returned to the living room. Neither turned on the television. Neither reached for a phone. They simply sat together in peaceful silence. Finally, Naya spoke. "Do you remember our first apartment?" Min Jun smiled immediately. "The one with the broken heater? And the tiny kitchen. We barely had enough room for 2 chairs." She laughed softly. "You used moving boxes as a dining table. You still said it was the best dinner you'd ever had. Because you cooked." He looked at her with gentle disbelief. "I nearly burned the rice." "You did burn the rice." They laughed together. "But I wasn't eating the rice." "What were you eating?" "The effort." Those simple words lingered between them. Min Jun reached for her hand. "I wish I had thanked you more back then. You thank me every day." "Not enough." She rested her head against his shoulder. "You know what I miss most?" "What?" "The way we used to dream." He frowned slightly. "We still dream, do we?" She wasn't criticizing him. She was simply wondering. When was the last time we dreamed about something that wasn't for the children or the company? He didn't answer immediately, because he realized she was right. For years, every goal had revolved around protecting their family, building a future, creating security. Somewhere along the way, they had forgotten to dream just for themselves. The following morning, Min Jun surprised everyone. At breakfast, he placed 4 envelopes on the table. Nadira gasped. "Are those presents?" "Sort of." Jiho opened his first. Inside were plane tickets. Naya looked confused. "Min Jun." He smiled. "We're leaving next week." "For where?" "You'll see." "You planned a surprise?" "I've had help." He looked toward Jiho. The boy immediately looked guilty. "I'm sorry, Mom." Naya laughed. "So you've both been keeping secrets?" "And Dad made me promise not to tell." Min Jun raised an eyebrow. "I believe I said it was classified information." Nadira giggled. "I don't know what classified means." "It means Daddy likes surprises." 1 week later, the family landed in New Zealand. It was the country where Naya had once dreamed of visiting during her university years, but could never afford. She stopped walking the moment she realized where they were. "You remembered." "I remember everything you tell me." Tears filled her eyes. "I mentioned this once." "You mentioned it 11 years ago." She looked at him in disbelief. "You still remembered?" "I always will." For the next several days, they explored breathtaking landscapes, hiked through green valleys, watched glowing night skies, and laughed more than they had in months. There were no business calls, no interruptions, no schedules, only family. One evening, while watching the sunset over a quiet lake, Jiho quietly asked his mother something that caught her by surprise. Mom, yes. Do grown-ups ever stop falling in love? Naya looked toward Min Jun, who was helping Nadira collect colorful stones nearby. She smiled. No, they don't. Not if they choose each other every day. What does that mean? It means love isn't something that only happens once. She gently held his hand. It's something you keep doing. You wake up, and you choose kindness. You choose forgiveness. You choose patience. You choose to stay. Jiho quietly nodded. He wasn't sure he understood completely, but he knew one thing. His parents lived exactly that way. Back in Korea, however, Seo Rin had finally finished writing her article. It wasn't an exposé. It wasn't a scandal. Its title simply read, "The Man Korea Fears and the Family That Knows His Heart." Within hours of publication, millions of people began reading it. Some refused to believe it. Others were deeply moved. The story spread across the country, and suddenly the family that had quietly protected its privacy found themselves at the center of unexpected public attention. Neither Min Jun nor Naya had ever sought admiration. Now they would have to decide whether to continue hiding from the world, or allow people to see that even the strongest man could also be the gentlest husband and father. That decision would change not only their future, but also the lives of countless families inspired by their example. When the Kong family returned to Seoul, they expected life to settle back into its familiar rhythm. Instead, everything had changed. The article about Min Jun had spread far beyond what anyone imagined. Television programs discussed it. Newspapers reprinted excerpts. Social media overflowed with comments from people who couldn't stop talking about the mysterious businessman whose greatest achievement, according to his own children, wasn't his wealth, but the way he loved his wife. Many people were skeptical. It has to be a publicity stunt. No powerful man is really like that. He probably hired someone to write it. Others believed every word. One particular sentence from the article touched millions of hearts. Power did not make Kong Min Jun extraordinary. The way he came home every evening and chose his family did. For days, that quote appeared everywhere. Min Jun, however, couldn't have cared less about the attention. As always, he was focused on getting home before dinner. That evening, the children were waiting near the front door. "Daddy's here," Nadira shouted as she heard the familiar sound of his car. She sprinted across the hallway before anyone could stop her. Min Jun had barely stepped inside when she threw her arms around him. "I missed you." He lifted her into his arms. "I was only gone for today." "I know." She smiled. "But I still missed you." Jiho walked over more calmly, pretending to be too grown up for hugs. Min Jun noticed immediately. He wrapped one arm around his son anyway. "I missed you too." Jiho laughed. "I wasn't going to say anything." "I know." "How?" "I'm your father." Naya watched from the kitchen doorway with the same smile she had worn for years. There was nothing dramatic about moments like these. No expensive gifts. No grand speeches. Just people choosing one another again and again. That night, while everyone sat around the dining table, Nadira suddenly asked a question that made the room fall silent. "Mom." "Yes, sweetheart." "Why do you and Daddy never stay angry?" Jiho looked up from his plate. He had wondered the same thing. Like every married couple, their parents occasionally disagreed. Sometimes it was over schedules. Sometimes over forgotten appointments. Sometimes over little misunderstandings. But somehow, before the children went to bed, everything was peaceful again. Naya looked at Min Jun before answering. "Because being right isn't as important as being together." Nadira blinked. "I don't understand." Min Jun smiled gently. "When Mommy and I disagree, we try to remember we're solving a problem, not fighting each other. And sometimes," Naya added with a laugh, "your father apologizes first." The children stared at him. "The scary Mafia boss says sorry?" Min Jun laughed louder than anyone else. Especially the scary Mafia boss. Everyone around the table burst into laughter. Later that evening, after the children had gone upstairs, Naya stood on the balcony overlooking the quiet city. The night breeze carried the scent of summer flowers through the garden. Min Jun joined her with 2 cups of tea. "I've been thinking," he said. She smiled. "You've said that a lot lately." "I suppose I have." He handed her one of the cups. "Do you regret it?" She looked puzzled. "Regret what?" Marrying me. Naya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gently reached for his hand. The same hand she had held through years of uncertainty. The same hand that had comforted her after difficult days. The same hand that still reached for hers every morning without thinking. She intertwined their fingers. Look at me. He did. If I lived 1,000 lives, I would still choose you. Emotion filled his eyes. Even after all these years, those words still had the power to humble him. You know, she continued softly, people think the reason we've stayed happy is because life became easy. He shook his head. It never became easy. No, it became worth fighting for. For several minutes, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of understanding. The following weekend, the family attended Jiho's school celebration. Parents filled the auditorium once again. This time, however, many recognized the family from the newspaper article. People whispered quietly. Some smiled. Others simply watched. Before the ceremony began, a father sitting nearby gathered enough courage to approach Min Jun. I hope you don't mind me saying this. Not at all. The man smiled nervously. My son came home after reading that article. Min Jun listened quietly. He asked me why I never hugged his mother. For a moment, the man looked embarrassed. I realized I didn't have a good answer. He glanced toward his wife, sitting a few seats away. So yesterday, I bought flowers on my way home. Min Jun smiled. How did she react? She cried. The man laughed. I think I'd forgotten that love needs to be shown. Before walking away, he bowed slightly. So, thank you. Min Jun watched him return to his family. For the first time, he realized something important. The article hadn't changed his life. It had reminded other people to treasure theirs. Months passed. Life gradually became normal again. Every Wednesday lunch date remained unchanged. Every Friday family movie night continued. Every Sunday breakfast was still made by Naya, despite everyone insisting she should let someone else cook. One rainy evening, the power briefly went out across the neighborhood. The mansion was suddenly dark. Instead of complaining, Nadira clapped excitedly. Candle night. Within minutes, the family sat together around the dining table illuminated only by candlelight. They roasted marshmallows over a small tabletop burner. They told funny stories. They laughed until tears rolled down their faces. When the electricity finally returned, nobody moved. Jiho smiled. Can we turn it off again? Everyone laughed. Years later, when Jiho and Nadira had grown into adults with families of their own, people often asked them the same question. What was it like growing up with such a powerful father? Neither ever mentioned wealth. Neither mentioned influence. Neither talked about expensive schools or luxury vacations. Instead, Jiho always smiled before answering. My father taught me that the strongest man in the world is the one who protects peace inside his home. Nadira's answer never changed either. My daddy held mommy's hand every single day, and he never stopped. One spring afternoon, long after the children had become parents themselves, the entire family gathered beneath blooming cherry blossom trees. Grandchildren ran across the grass, laughing just as Jiho and Nadira once had. Naya looked at her husband. His hair had begun turning silver. Tiny lines had appeared around his eyes. Yet when he looked at her, she still saw the same young man who had once nervously apologized for burning rice in their tiny apartment. Without saying a word, Min Jun reached for her hand. She smiled. You still remember. I always will. Their grandchildren noticed immediately. One little boy tugged at Jiho's sleeve. Grandpa still holds Grandma's hand. Jiho smiled, remembering a classroom many years before. Yes. He always has. He always will. As the cherry blossoms drifted gently through the spring air, the family stood together, surrounded not by fear or power, but by something far greater. A legacy of love. One built through patience instead of pride, through forgiveness instead of ego, through ordinary moments that became extraordinary because they were shared. And in the end, that was the greatest victory Kang Min Jun ever achieved. Not the businesses he built, not the influence he earned, not the respect people gave him, but the family that never doubted they were loved. This story reminds us that true strength isn't measured by power, status, or wealth. It is measured by how we treat the people who trust us most. Love grows through daily choices, holding hands after many years, apologizing after disagreements, making time for family, and showing kindness even when life is demanding. Trust, loyalty, forgiveness, and presence create a home where children feel safe, and those quiet acts of love become the legacy they carry into their own lives. If you made it this far, let us know where you're watching from and comment your favorite moment below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to official_threads for more emotional Mafia love stories.